Right now, in the heart of Beijing, at the Great Hall of the People, one of the most symbolic buildings in all of China, the President of the United States and the President of the People's Republic of China are sitting across from each other, and the world is watching. This is not a routine diplomatic visit. This is not a photo opportunity. What is unfolding in Beijing today is, in the opinion of many serious analysts, one of the most consequential meetings in modern geopolitical history. And yet, most people watching the headlines have no idea what is truly at stake. Let's step back and understand what we are actually witnessing. Donald Trump arrived in Beijing last night. This morning, he stepped out of his presidential limousine, a vehicle that, by the way, was flown in from the United States aboard a military transport aircraft. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing about this visit is casual. The last time an American president set foot in Beijing was 9 years ago. That was November 2017, Trump's first term. And if you remember what followed that visit, it was the beginning of the U.S.-China trade war. Tariffs, sanctions, bans on Chinese technology companies, a decade of economic hostility between the world's two largest economies. So why is he back, and why does this visit feel so different? The first clue is who came with him. Trump did not arrive with just diplomats and generals. He arrived with his family. His son, Eric, his daughter-in-law, Lara, people who were genuinely excited about coming to China, according to posts circulating on Weibo, which is China's version of Twitter. But family aside, the truly significant people on this trip are the business executives. Consider this list for a moment. Elon Musk, the head of Tesla, a company that does enormous business inside China and depends on Chinese supply chains. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, a company whose entire manufacturing backbone is located in China. Boeing, reportedly here to negotiate a $50 billion aircraft sale to Chinese airlines. Larry Fink of BlackRock, Stephen Schwarzman of Blackstone, David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, representatives from Citigroup, MasterCard, and Visa. If you add up the combined value of the companies represented in that room, you arrive at a number that is almost impossible to comprehend, over 12 trillion US dollars. Now, think about this from a business perspective. These are among the busiest and most powerful people on Earth. They do not fly to Beijing together at the same time on the same trip unless something very large is about to be announced. You do not assemble $12 trillion of corporate power in one room for a press conference. Something is coming. And in this commentary, we are going to tell you exactly what that is, why it is happening now, and what it means for you, for China, for America, and for the world. Segment 2. How we got here. The road to Beijing. To understand today, we need to understand yesterday, and the days and weeks leading up to this historic summit contain a number of important signals that, if read correctly, tell us that this meeting was not spontaneous, it was carefully choreographed. Let's walk through the key events of the past month. First, the Manus incident. Manus is an artificial intelligence company that was born and incubated in China. It became extremely successful, and its founders, like many ambitious Chinese tech entrepreneurs, wanted to move to the United States. America has the capital, the talent, and the infrastructure to turn a promising AI startup into a global giant. But Beijing said no. The Chinese government blocked the move. The message was clear. China is fighting an AI war, and it will not allow its best intellectual assets to emigrate to the competition. Second, American sanctions on Chinese companies doing business with Iran. The U.S. imposed penalties on Chinese satellite firms that were selling commercial intelligence to Iran, specifically intelligence about the location of American military bases. Washington also sanctioned what are known as teapot refineries, small Chinese operations that process Iranian oil. Beijing's response was striking. Rather than quietly complying, as Chinese institutions had often done in the past with American sanctions, China issued what is called a blocking order. It told Chinese citizens, if you comply with American sanctions, we will sanction you. This was the first time Beijing had taken such a direct, public stance, an escalation. Third, Nvidia. The American semiconductor giant, arguably the most important technology company in the world right now because artificial intelligence runs on its chips, was blocked from selling its most advanced chips into the Chinese market. For Nvidia, this is a serious financial wound. For China, it means falling further behind in the AI race. Fourth, China invited Iran's Foreign Minister Arakchi to Beijing. China imports between 50% and 60% of its energy from the Middle East. The war between the United States and Iran's potential blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is an existential concern for Chinese economic planners. So Beijing invited Arakchi for consultations. Fifth, a major American and allied war game exercise in the Philippines designed to simulate conflict scenarios in the region. China responded by deploying 28 warships, a show of military muscle. Sixth, and this is the most important signal before the summit, Haley Feng, China's top economic official, and Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, met quietly in South Korea, not in Beijing, not in Washington, in Seoul. Two men, behind closed doors, trying to sketch out the framework of a deal. And then, once those talks in South Korea showed progress, Beijing formally announced that Trump would make a state visit to China. Now, here's the analytical lens you need to apply to all of this. Most commentators look at each of these events individually and see escalation. They see an AI war. They see sanctions and counter-sanctions. They see warships. They conclude that U.S.-China relations are deteriorating rapidly. But that is the wrong way to read this situation. Think of it like a negotiation. When two sides are approaching a major deal, they do not come to the table empty-handed. They come with leverage. They create pressure. They publicly posture. Beijing blocking Manus is leverage. America blocking Nvidia chips is leverage. The blocking order on sanctions is leverage. The warships are leverage. All of this theater is designed to set the terms of what comes next. And what comes next is a grand bargain. Segment 3. The theory behind the world. Understanding power. Before we get into the specifics of that grand bargain, we need to step back and think about something more fundamental. We need to understand how global power actually works. And here's a framework that most political scientists and economists will never teach you because it requires a level of candor that is uncomfortable. Think about this image, Plato's allegory of the cave. In this ancient Greek thought experiment, imagine a group of people who have been chained inside a cave their entire lives. They face a blank wall. Behind them is a fire. Between the fire and the people, powerful figures walk back and forth, casting shadows on the wall.
These chained people, who have never seen the real world, believe the shadows are reality. They name them, build stories around them, construct entire worldviews based on the shapes flickering on the wall. This is, in essence, how the modern global economic system works. At the base of this system is what we might call the empire, the framework of American military and institutional power that provides the structure within which everything else operates. Within that framework, the real directors of the system are the financial elite, the Federal Reserve, Wall Street, the City of London, private capital at its most concentrated and powerful. These are the people casting the shadows. And the mechanism they use is the US dollar. Then they construct institutions, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, that appear to be international, neutral, and objective. But these institutions were designed within the American-led system and reflect its interests. And then beneath that, there is media, education, and culture. The machinery that convinces ordinary people that the shadows on the wall are real. Now here is the critical insight. This system by itself has a fundamental fragility. It is a hallucination. It only works if everyone believes it works. The moment enough people stop believing, the moment trust collapses, the entire structure is at risk. And in 1971, the system nearly collapsed. That was the year Richard Nixon made one of the most consequential economic decisions in modern history. He removed the US dollar from the gold standard. Before 1971, every US dollar in circulation was backed by a specific quantity of gold held in reserve. The dollar had intrinsic value. After 1971, the dollar was backed by nothing except faith. This is what economists call fiat currency. And the question becomes, how do you maintain the value of a currency that is backed by nothing? Nixon's answer was audacious. He created two new demand mechanisms for the dollar. The first was the petrodollar. Working with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, America secured an agreement. Oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, would only be bought and sold in US dollars. If any country in the world wanted to import oil, it first had to acquire US dollars. This created a structural, permanent global demand for the American currency. And the second mechanism was China. And this is where our story truly begins. Segment 4. How China was built. The manufacturing illusion. Nixon's visit to China in 1972 is remembered in history books as a masterstroke of Cold War diplomacy. The conventional explanation is that Henry Kissinger, Nixon's national security advisor, wanted to triangulate between China and the Soviet Union, to draw Beijing away from Moscow and thereby weaken America's Cold War rival. That explanation is not wrong, but it is incomplete. The deeper logic of Nixon's China opening was economic. The plan, as it unfolded over the following decades, was this: turn China into the manufacturing engine of the global economy. Let China produce the goods that the world consumes. Let China build the factories, train the workers, extract the resources, and ship the products. And critically, have all of this trade conducted in US dollars. This served America's interests in a profound way. And for China, it was transformative. Within 30 years, China went from being a poor agricultural society to the world's largest manufacturing nation. It surpassed the United States in industrial output. It built megacities. It lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It became, by almost every measure, an economic superpower. But here is the uncomfortable truth that Chinese policymakers have been grappling with for the past decade. This entire miracle was built on a foundation that China did not control. China's wealth is denominated in US dollars. China's trade runs through dollar-based systems. China's financial system is ultimately a derivative of American financial architecture. In the metaphor we used earlier, China is a hallucination of a hallucination, a shadow of a shadow. This is not a criticism. It is simply the logical consequence of the system that was built. And this is why when China tried to assert independence, when Beijing began to believe that it could create its own economic sphere, its own technological ecosystem, its own financial architecture, America pushed back hard. That pushback was the trade war. Starting in 2018 under Trump's first term, the United States began imposing tariffs on Chinese goods. It sanctioned Chinese tech companies, Huawei, ZTE, and others. It blocked China from accessing advanced semiconductors. It tried to force China to protect American intellectual property and to open its financial markets to American capital. For 8 years, this conflict has continued. But here's what the trade war actually revealed. China cannot simply walk away from the American-led system. The evidence is in the data. Consumer confidence in China has collapsed since 2018 and never recovered. Capital flight is accelerating. Chinese citizens and businesses are moving money out of the country at extraordinary rates, using export transactions as a mechanism for money laundering on a massive scale. And the best and brightest Chinese students who study abroad are increasingly choosing not to return. And the Chinese economy, despite its impressive headline figures, is carrying the weight of a profound structural weakness. Its people save 40% of their income because they do not trust the future. China needs this deal, perhaps even more than America does. Segment 5. The weapons of the trade war. Before we get to the grand bargain itself, it is worth pausing to understand the weapons that both sides have been using in this conflict, because understanding the weapons helps you understand the terms of the peace. China's first major weapon has been rare earth minerals. Rare earths, elements like lithium, cobalt, graphite, and dozens of others, are the essential raw materials for the modern technology economy. They go into electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, and semiconductor manufacturing. Without them, none of these industries function.
My name is Evan Charette. China made the decision, decades ago, to invest heavily in rare earth extraction and processing. Today, China controls the overwhelming majority of the world's rare earth supply chain. This is a formidable weapon. If Beijing restricts exports of rare earths, as it has threatened to do, it can create serious disruptions in American and European technology manufacturing. China's second weapon is its relationship with the US dollar itself. China holds an enormous quantity of US Treasury bonds, American government debt. For years, China was one of the largest foreign holders of US Treasuries, but in recent years, China has been quietly reducing those holdings and purchasing gold instead. The chart is striking. Chinese gold reserves have gone up dramatically, while Treasury holdings have declined. This is China sending a message: we are reducing our dependence on your financial system. But here is the problem. Both of these weapons have limits. Rare earth restrictions hurt China too. The industries that depend on rare earths, electric vehicles, electronics, clean energy, are also major Chinese export industries. Cutting off supply to the world means cutting off demand for Chinese manufactured goods. And reducing treasury holdings is a slow, painful process. China cannot simply dump its treasuries without crashing their value and destroying the worth of its own remaining holdings in the process. Meanwhile, America's weapons are more fundamental. The United States controls the world's oceans. The U.S. Navy dominates the key maritime choke points through which global trade must pass: the Strait of Malacca, through which the majority of Chinese energy imports travel, the Strait of Hormuz, currently threatened by the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, the Panama Canal, and the waters around Taiwan. China imports an enormous amount of its energy, 50 to 60% of its total energy needs, from the Middle East. If those supply lines are disrupted, the Chinese economy faces a serious crisis. America's military presence in the region means Beijing can never fully ignore this vulnerability. And then there is Venezuela. In a move that surprised many observers, the Trump administration recently announced its intention to bring Venezuela firmly under American control, making it the 51st state of the Union. This is not simply about Venezuela itself. It is about South America's energy resources, and it is about China. China has been investing heavily in South America for years, building infrastructure, securing resource contracts, developing ports and rail lines. South America represents an alternative energy supply chain that Beijing has been quietly cultivating for precisely this moment, as a hedge against Middle Eastern instability. If America locks down Venezuela and reestablishes dominance over the Western Hemisphere, China's alternative energy supply options narrow dramatically. China is not left without options. It can buy more energy from Russia. But here's the thing: China does not want to become entirely dependent on Russia either. Beijing sees itself as an independent pole of power in the world, not a junior partner to Moscow. China's relationship with Russia is useful, but it is a relationship Beijing wants to manage on its own terms. An America that controls the Western Hemisphere, combined with instability in the Middle East, creates a situation in which China needs a deal with the United States on energy access. This is leverage, and America knows it. Segment 6. The Financial Architecture of the Grand Bargain. Now let us get to the heart of this deal. What do each side actually want? Let's start with America. The United States is carrying $39 trillion in national debt. At an interest rate of approximately 5%, the U.S. government must pay roughly $2 trillion per year in interest payments alone. This is not sustainable. Something has to change. The traditional solution has been to find new buyers for U.S. Treasury bonds, new sources of demand for American government debt. For decades, foreign governments, China, Japan, the Gulf states, were the major buyers, but their capacity to absorb more debt is limited. So American financial architects have devised a new strategy. It is called stablecoins. You may have heard of stablecoins in the context of cryptocurrency. The most well-known are Tether and Circle. The concept is simple. A stablecoin is a digital currency whose value is pegged to the US dollar. One stablecoin always equals $1 US. But here is the crucial mechanism. In order to issue stablecoins, companies like Tether and Circle must hold U.S. Treasuries as reserves. Every stablecoin in circulation represents an equivalent holding of American government debt. The U.S. Congress is currently working on legislation, the Genius Act and the Clarity Act, that would formalize and expand this system, legally requiring stablecoin issuers to back their digital currencies with U.S. Treasuries. Now think about what this means in the context of China. China has a closed capital account. This means Chinese citizens cannot freely convert their Chinese yuan into foreign currencies. The government maintains this restriction because it knows that if the capital account were opened freely, enormous amounts of Chinese savings would immediately flow out of the country into US dollars and other foreign assets. This would devastate the Chinese banking system and potentially collapse the economy. But stablecoins offer a workaround. A Chinese citizen cannot easily convert yuan to dollars. But if Apple Pay, Visa, MasterCard, or a Chinese fintech platform offer a stablecoin, a digital currency that functions like dollars for practical purposes, the distinction becomes blurry. Chinese consumers access dollar-denominated wealth through stablecoins. Those stablecoins are backed by U.S. Treasuries. The American's debt gets financed. The circle is complete. This is why Larry Fink of BlackRock is on this trip. This is why Goldman Sachs and Citigroup are here. This is why MasterCard and Visa made the journey to Beijing. They are here to negotiate access to the largest untapped financial market in the world, the savings of 1.4 billion Chinese citizens. Now, what does China want in return? 3 things. First, energy security. China needs reliable, affordable access to the energy resources of the Western Hemisphere. With the Middle East in turmoil and Russia as an uncomfortable partner, South America represents China's best alternative. China wants guarantees that even as America reasserts control over the region, Chinese access to energy will be protected. Second, Nvidia chips. China's AI development is strangled by the lack of access to advanced semiconductors. The AI revolution and the economic, military, and surveillance advantages it brings depends on computing power. Computing power depends on Nvidia. China wants the export restrictions loosened.
Third, continued access to American consumer markets. Chinese manufacturing's prosperity depends on exports. The American consumer is the most important customer in the world. Whatever else changes, China needs that relationship to continue. And here is the twist that makes this deal possible from China's perspective. Taiwan. Segment 7. The Taiwan Question and the Geopolitical Reshaping. For 70 years, Taiwan has been the central unresolved tension in U.S.-China relations. When the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949, the defeated nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek retreated to the island of Taiwan. The United States, which had supported the nationalists, refused to recognize the communist government in Beijing as the legitimate government of China. For decades, America insisted that Taiwan, and only Taiwan, was the real China. No diplomatic relations with Beijing, no trade, and an implicit promise to help Taiwan eventually reclaim the mainland. When Nixon visited in 1972, this all changed. The Shanghai Communique, the joint statement issued at the end of that visit, established the framework for American engagement with China. The United States acknowledged the Chinese position that there is one China and that Taiwan is part of China. It did not formally endorse that position, but it acknowledged it. Since then, America has practiced what is called strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. The official U.S. position is we do not support Taiwan independence, not we oppose it, just we do not support it. China has long wanted America to go further. Beijing wants Washington to say we oppose Taiwan independence and we support the reunification of China and Taiwan. For every previous American administration, this was a line that could not be crossed. Taiwan's security was treated as a core American commitment. The U.S. maintained arms sales to Taipei, a military presence in the region, and a deliberate policy of keeping Beijing uncertain about what America would actually do if China attempted to take Taiwan by force. But here is the geopolitical calculus that is changed under Trump. Consider a map of the Western Pacific. Taiwan sits at a critical point along what strategists call the first island chain, a series of islands running from Japan down through the Philippines that separates China's coastline from the open Pacific. Taiwan, right in the middle, has functionally acted as a cork in a bottle, preventing Chinese naval power from projecting freely into the Pacific. This is why American military planners have long insisted that Taiwan's independence is a strategic necessity. But look at this from a different angle. If Taiwan were reunified with China, if the island came under Beijing's control, what would happen? Taiwan would not disappear. Its geographic position would remain, and in Chinese hands, Taiwan would become something very interesting, a barrier separating Japan and South Korea from the rest of Southeast Asia. Think about it. Japan imports virtually all of its energy through the sea lanes that pass south of Taiwan, through the waters near the Philippines and into the Indian Ocean. South Korea depends on the same routes. If China controlled Taiwan and chose to restrict access to those waters, it could effectively hold Japan and South Korea's energy supply at risk. This would immediately force Tokyo and Seoul to make a choice: accept Chinese regional dominance or find another patron. From a certain American strategic perspective, this is not a disaster. It transfers the Taiwan problem, the responsibility for managing cross-strait tensions, the cost of deterring Chinese military action from the United States to Japan and South Korea. Two wealthy, capable allies who benefit enormously from American security guarantees, but who have, in recent years, been reluctant to shoulder more of the burden. If Trump were to announce, as part of this grand bargain, that the United States supports Chinese reunification with Taiwan, the shockwaves through Tokyo and Seoul would be immediate and dramatic. Japan and South Korea would be forced to massively increase their own defense spending. They would be forced to engage with China directly on terms less favorable than those available under American protection. The United States, meanwhile, would step back from an expensive and increasingly dangerous commitment. This is why, in the view of serious geopolitical analysts, Trump endorsing Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan is not the strategic blunder it might appear to be. It is in fact a calculated transfer of risk and responsibility. And from China's side, this would be the prize of prizes: reunification with Taiwan, peacefully, diplomatically, through an American blessing, would be the greatest geopolitical achievement in the history of the People's Republic. It would vindicate decades of patience. It would be the legacy that President Xi Jinping could leave to the nation. In exchange for that, China would give a great deal. Segment 8, The Grand Bargain, AI, and What Comes Next. Let us now bring all of this together and describe what the grand bargain of this Beijing summit will likely look like. Consider what happened in the hours just before Trump's plane landed. Jensen Huang, the Nvidia CEO, the man whose chips power the artificial intelligence revolution, was originally not on the guest list for this trip. Beijing knew it. The Chinese side had been pushing for Huang's inclusion as a signal of American sincerity. When Scott Bessent and Li Fang were negotiating in Seoul, one of the sticking points was precisely this. China wanted a commitment on semiconductors. America was using Huang's absence as leverage. Then, as Trump's plane was refueling in Alaska, something changed. There was a breakthrough in the negotiating framework, and suddenly, Jensen Huang was boarding the presidential aircraft in Anchorage. This is how high-stakes business negotiations work. You withhold, you apply pressure, you get a concession, and then you demonstrate goodwill through a symbolic act. Huang boarding that plane in Alaska was not logistics, it was diplomacy. So here is the framework of the deal, as best as we can analyze it. China gives. Opening of the financial sector to American firms like BlackRock, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup. A commitment to allow Chinese consumers to access dollar-denominated stablecoin products through platforms like Apple Pay, Visa, and MasterCard. A commitment to purchase American energy exports and to allow Chinese manufacturing investment in the Western Hemisphere, including Venezuela, on terms favorable to American strategic interests. A willingness to curtail the most aggressive aspects of its AI competition with America and to cooperate on shared AI development infrastructure. America gives. A relaxation of Nvidia chip export restrictions, allowing China access to advanced semiconductors for civilian AI development. A commitment, potentially historic, on Taiwan, moving American policy from strategic ambiguity towards explicit support of the principle of one China and eventual peaceful reunification. A recognition of Chinese legitimate interests in Asian regional affairs and energy security. And together, a framework for stabilizing the global economy. An agreement that neither side will take actions designed to destabilize the dollar-based financial system on which both nations' prosperity depends. Now, let us address the AI dimension of this deal, because it is perhaps the most fascinating element. Most analysts frame AI as a competition between the United States and China. Who will dominate artificial intelligence? Who will have the best chips, the best models, the best applications?
But this framing misses something important. The most transformative application of artificial intelligence, the one that changes everything, is not a chatbot or an image generator. It is surveillance. Artificial intelligence, combined with ubiquitous cameras, digital payment systems, biometric databases, and behavioral analytics, makes possible a level of social monitoring and control that was previously unimaginable. Every face identified, every transaction tracked, every movement recorded, every anomaly flagged. America has the technology. China has something America lacks: scale, population density, and an absence of legal constraints on surveillance. China is in effect the world's largest laboratory for AI-powered social control. The grand bargain includes an implicit agreement. America's AI companies gain access to Chinese data, Chinese testing environments, and Chinese infrastructure. China gains access to American chip technology and processing power. Together, they build the architecture of the surveillance state, a system that, once established, becomes nearly impossible to dismantle. This is the deepest level of the deal, and it is why both sides need each other. As we conclude, let us zoom out one final time. The meeting happening in Beijing today is not simply about trade policy or semiconductors or financial markets. It is about the future architecture of global power. It is about whether the hallucination, the global economic system built on US dollars and American military dominance, can be maintained and extended into the 21st century. For the past decade, many people believed that the US-China trade war was the beginning of a fundamental decoupling, a split of the world into two competing economic blocs, one led by Washington and one led by Beijing, two different supply chains, two different financial systems, two different internets, a new Cold War. What is happening in Beijing today suggests a different trajectory. Not decoupling, recoupling on new terms. China has learned that it cannot survive outside the American-led system. The capital flight, the brain drain, the collapse of consumer confidence, these are the symptoms of a nation that tried to assert independence and discovered that the foundations of its prosperity were not its own. America has learned that it cannot simply squeeze China into submission. China is too large, too integrated, too interconnected with the global economy to be simply forced to comply. So they have come to the table. What emerges from the Great Hall of the People in the next 24 to 48 hours will tell us whether the deal we have outlined here is correct. Watch for these signals. If Jensen Huang appears in a photo with Xi Jinping, the semiconductor deal is real. If the word stablecoin or digital currency appears in the official joint communiqué, the financial opening is real. If the language on Taiwan shifts, if American officials begin using phrases like, "We support the eventual peaceful reunification of China," the geopolitical transformation is real. And if a figure near $1 trillion is mentioned in relation to Chinese investment into American and Western Hemisphere manufacturing, the economic grand bargain is real. This is the story of our time. Not the tariffs, not the warships, not the diplomatic posturing. Those are the shadows on the cave wall. The real story is the negotiation over who controls the fire. And right now, in Beijing, they are making that deal.